Characterizing fingerprints. So when we look at a fingerprint and we're trying to decide whose is whose, what exactly is it that we're looking at? These features are called ridge characteristics. The ridge characteristics that are less obvious, that are small little features in the fingerprint, are called minutia. And over here is a list of different kinds of minutia. I always misspell it. Here we go. You can characterize it by the identity of the minutia. Is it a delta? Is it a hook? Is it an eye? And the relative arrangement. Is the delta next to a whorl on the fingerprint, or is it under it? Is it on top of it? Is it very far to the left? Is it very far under? Is the central feature, the major whorl, is it huge or is it small? How many of these minutia do you have? If you get a full, crystal clear set of 10 fingerprint, you can have up to 150 different identifiable characteristics, not just the type here, but the arrangement too. You have a core, but it's close. You have a core, but it's large. You have a core, but it's whatever. These are additional characteristics that you can pick out. Of course, you almost never get a full print from the scene, and remember, the full print actually extends the whole way around the finger. It's not just that finger pad part. You can have minutia features towards the sides of your fingers, extending all the way over to close to your fingernail and all the way down to that first knuckle crease on by your fingertip. Even if you get a full print from a scene of where you get all 10 fingers represented, you almost definitely don't get the full fingerprint. The number of ridge matches doesn't really have an industry standard. For like what counts as a match, how many matches, ridge matches counts as an identity match, there's no actual scientific standard. 8 to 16 is generally accepted. Some organizations require more, some require as few as that 8, and that's going to be entirely up to the jurisdiction in question. In 1973, the International Association of Identifications stated that, quote, no valid basis exists for requiring a predetermined minimum of friction ridge characteristics which must be present on 2 impressions in order to establish positive identification. This is a major reason for why you can have a different number of characteristics and why perhaps assigning a number to how many you need to count as a match might not work. If you have 2 people with very strikingly different characteristics on their fingerprints, you might only have 8 differences, but if they're super different from one another, that might be enough. If you have 2 people's set of fingerprints and they're otherwise very close, you might need a lot more to be able to characterize them as being different from one another. The idea behind here is saying a couple of things. First of all, there's no scientific basis for this whatsoever. There's some statistical basis for it. There's some basic foundational principles that seem to hold up well enough to respect this in court, but there isn't anything that's actually based in the scientific method to found this. Second of all, we do have a foundational basis in science for that no 2 people are really exactly alike in every single way, and some people are very different looking from one another. So setting a minimum number kind of doesn't make a minimum or maximum number for what has to be similar or different, kind of doesn't make sense. You really need to take this on a case-by-case basis until we have a better scientific basis for determining otherwise. Major ridge arrangement features include loops, which are where the ridge enters and exits from one side. You can see that on here, an ulnar loop and a radial loop. Remember a couple of slides ago where we had a picture of somebody's hand, thumb, finger, wrist. I mentioned that the thumb side is the radial side of their hand because you have 2 bones in your forearm. The one closest to your thumb is your radius, and you have an ulna is the pinky side. So this is the ulnar. If you have a loop that comes, enters, and exits on the ulnar side, this is an ulnar loop. And if it enters and exits from the radial side, that's a radial loop. The way I keep this straight is the thumb, you can turn your thumb around in a full circle. The thumb radiates around the radius. So the thumb side is the radial side. The minutiae and ridge characteristics that surround the central loop or whorl or whatever are called type lines. So all of these things are type lines. Boom, there's a delta, there's other little humps. And this delta refers to a river delta where you have a type line divergence. So you go from being like part of the loop to a part of these more straight lines underneath the loop. A whorl, this is another type of major ridge arrangement, is a set of concentric circles. So there's usually like a dot here in the middle. Whoops. And you've got circle, 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 circle moving on out. At some point you have a delta where you have these type lines around it and type lines under it. And then you have central lines that are actually part of the whorl. A plain whorl is really just as simple as it gets. You have a bunch of concentric circles surrounded by type lines. A double loop whorl is where you basically have two loops that kind of nest into each other like a yin and a yang. A central pocket loop whorl is where the circle is like further away. So you have a delta here, and you probably have another delta off to the side, and you have this smaller kind of situation that almost looks like a loop that happened to wrap around in on itself. And finally, you have what's called an accidental whorl. This isn't even a concentric circle situation. This is just a miscellaneous kind of, I don't know, grab bag of something that doesn't fit any of the other major patterns. Finally, and we've seen this as a feature on a lot of people's fingers outside of the major ridge arrangement, but you can see an arch pattern that some people have where instead of having any kind of swirly or circly situation, you just kind of have a bump. If it's particularly pointy, it's referred to as a tented arch.